Conditions and triggers. In this module, we are going to learn about conditions and triggers. Firstly, we're going to see conditions. A form must be able to act according to the user's actions. This means that each form can obtain its own logic action process. This logic is defined in the forms through already defined actions that need completing, depending on other actions that had already been completed. We can see here in the animated image how if I select credit card, the card number field appears, but if I select check, the field that appears is different. As we said before, depending on what we choose first, a different option will appear. So the second field is conditioned to the value selected in the first one. Let's see now several examples. Example 1, data only requested when necessary. A form to sign up students on a school trip contains a field, a yes/no one, named food restrictions. We want that if the option yes is checked, some other fields appear to add the restrictions, but if it's no, that they don't. Example 2, calculations that allow the users to decide better. The form's logic can be combined with calculations, so the form actions are controlled based on the calculated values. For example, if the system spots via formulas that the client might be a high risk, the person responsible will receive a recommendation to not offer the credit, insurance, etc. Therefore, here, depending on the calculations, it will direct us to one decision or another. And the example 3, divisions only requested when necessary. The form's logic can be divided in several steps, divisions. In each step, data is introduced which influences the quantity of data that will appear in the following step. This way, the user is only presented with the fields that have to be filled out. A regular example are the online payment forms. If you decide to pay by Visa, you will only have to fill out the data for the Visa. If you decide to pay throughout PayPal, then you'll have to fill out the specific fields for PayPal. Let's see how triggers work now. Apart from triggering with a button, divisions can be triggered with a yes/no, simple selection and multiple selection terms options. If it is a yes/no term type, depending on the option I choose, some different fields will be triggered. If it is a simple selection term, we can set it up so each option triggers a different field. When will a trigger should be used instead of a condition? Triggers should be used instead of a condition when it is only triggered when you select that option. In this example, the suggestion option, if we select suggestion, we can see it triggers a division where we can see the suggestion data. This division is triggered by a simple selection field. Using a trigger with a multiple selection field only works when the options appear as markers. This is very important, we really need to remember this. Actions between different options cannot be combined. What happens when a division is triggered and conditioned at the same time? Let's suppose data suggestion division is triggered by the suggestion option, but at the same time it is conditioned to the reasons field being empty. In this case, the division will always be triggered if reasons is empty, since conditions always prevail over triggers. Buttons. A button can realize one or several actions, like showing, hiding a division, creating a document, save. These actions can be triggered after pressing a button, but they can also be triggered when we introduce data in a field. In this case, it's not necessary that the fields are visible. Let's see an example. Here we have the option create. If I choose invoices, the action in the button will be automatically executed. Therefore, we don't need the button to be visible. If we choose create a budget, the action of the other button will be the one executed. In this example, we have seen buttons that allow us to do some actions, but they don't need to be visible, since their actions are executed through the interaction of the user with the create field. Let's go now to execution. Let's go to my tasks, teacher process, and let's go to conditions and triggers. here we can see we have several buttons. So if I click on close, this hides the division, okay? If I'm here and I click on condition triggers, it opens a division, okay? So we can, as you can see, we can hide and show different elements apart from other options. So if we go to settings, conditions and triggers, we can see the different options of the button. So for example, close, the action is to trigger and triggers conditions and triggers division, okay, and hides it, okay? So when I click on that button, it will just hide this division, okay? We also have this one, this button with a message, and let's see. And what it does is it shows the field message, okay? Which is this one, okay? This complement. So when I click here, what it does is to show this complement. Let's see another examples of conditions and triggers. So let's go back to execution. So for example, if in a status I choose, let's choose delivered, nothing happens. But if I choose rejected, the field reasons appear. So let's go and see why this is happening and how did we configure this. So if we go to status, and we go to rejected, we can see why did we have that, okay? So it triggers the next action to show, okay, the multiple line text reasons field. This is a simple selection term, okay, that triggers another field. That will be this one. Right, let's go back to execution. And let's imagine now in type of communication, we add, which is complain. As we can see, okay, if I go back so you can see it, just pay attention to what happens when I choose complain. So I get this notified field, okay, it shows up, and this one as well, and the message button, okay? So again, if I choose complaint, it triggers this to appear and this button to appear. So if we go to settings, okay, and I go to this term, for example, I can see here that it's been conditioned. And if we go here, we can see the conditions. If we go to the message one, we can see that it's been conditioned as well, this button. The condition here, okay, is that in type of communication, we have complain. So we choose complain. Every time we choose complain, the message button will show up. In this one, we have, as opposed to one, we have two conditions. So we need to have in a status rejected, and as a type of communication, we need to have a complaint, okay? If one of these two is not met, then the notify field won't appear, okay? We need both conditions, okay, to be met. So if we go back to the process we were and choose suggestion instead of complain, we can see that the message button disappears, and so does the notified field. We have already mentioned that if I choose complaint, okay, the message button appears, and this one triggers a complement. Okay, just mentioned that before. Now, if I double click, we can see that it doesn't trigger anything. Why? It is due to the fact that the complement is conditioned to, and is conditioned to the status being approved, not rejected. And as we can see now, the complement has just appeared. The complement is triggered by message, but at the same time conditioned by the approved status, that status being approved. Okay, let's go back to settings and we have a look at the complement. So we can see it's been conditioned, as we said, and again, it's conditioned to status being approved. If the status is not approved, the complement won't appear. If I go to notify, I can see that I have the option yes and no. So if we go back to here and choose suggestion and reject it, sorry, complain. Okay, and choose notify yes, we will see that this option triggers another field, okay, the delegate one. So if we go to settings, we can see how this has been configured. So if we go here and we go to the option yes, we can see, okay, the configuration of what we just seen in execution, okay, that if I chose yes, the delegate field appears. We have seen several condition and trigger options. Here, for example, the notify field is conditioned. That's why it's triggered, because it is conditioned to two values. For a simple action, we can use a button. For more complex actions, we need to use conditions. Okay, so let's close on Windows and go back to execution, and let's see this one that is a multiple selection field. So if I click on art, the comments field shows up. If I click on reading, nothing happens. If I click on cinema, I get the brand field, and so on. Each option triggers a different field, so we need to be aware that if we select several options, it will always trigger the last option we choose, okay? So it's important to know which one is the last one. So if I do this, okay, as this has been the last one, cinema, I will get the brand field here. But if I was to kind of do it the other way around, okay, it will be comments, the field that will stay there. So let's go back to settings now. As we mentioned before, the option in the field must be configured as markers. So we need this term to be here, select as markers, okay, not a pop-up window. Otherwise, we cannot do what we are doing here. So if I go into one of the options, for example, art, okay, I can show how to configure here. This will be just the language, and this will be trigger. In this example, the option art triggers, okay, the field comments. If we go back and choose another one, like for example, cinema, okay, we can see that it triggers a one-line field test. Brand. Okay? Right. If we go to attributes here and we go to trigger, we can see all the different trigger options that we have selected here, that we have configured. Okay? So we will see the division, that the action is to close it, okay, to hide it. And here will be that this division and the action is show. Okay? This is quite useful. So as I said, from here you can see the trigger elements in the division. Now if I go to form properties, we can see fields used in conditions. Okay, this option as well give us all the information. So as before we could see the triggers, now we can see here what has been conditioned. And again, we can also see the trigger elements. Okay, so we have the name and the type of trigger. To sum up, triggers are quicker than conditions, but condition allows us more actions, more options. We can trigger with a button, a simple selection term, a yes/no term, and a multiple selection term. But this last one has to be configured as markers. Each one can trigger one option. A combination is not possible. And that's shall we all for this part. Now it's your turn to do part 1.